Hello, I'm Jeremy, and today we're going to be working on this 2012 Ford Escape. We're going to be installing lower control arms on the front of it, and if you need lower control arms for your car or any suspension parts, find the TRQ brand because they're rigorously tested, direct fit, and they're just a great part. So let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is loosen the lug nuts on the wheel. We want to do that while the car is on the ground so the wheel doesn't turn while we're turning the lug nuts. This is a 19mm socket that I'm using on a 1/2-inch breaker bar, by the way. All right, so now that the car is up in the air, we can take our 19mm and we can spin off the rest of the lug nuts. With the lug nuts off, we can take the wheel off. Down here is your lower ball joint, and we are going to remove the bolt from the top of the lower ball joint. It has a 15mm nut on it, so we're going to use a 15mm socket and a 3/8 ratchet to release it. All right, looks like this is going to spin off pretty easily. The bolt seems to be stuck in there, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the nut on loosely, but have it flush with the end of the bolt. I'm going to give it a little tap with a hammer. There we go. So now it's gone down, which means the bolt's coming out the other side. So now I can take this nut off and hopefully tap it all the way through. All right, well, the bolt's out, so that worked. So now we're going to go for this inner bushing bolt, or inner control arm bolt. It's 15mm as well, so we're going to go after it with the 3/8 ratchet and a 15mm socket. These ones are usually pretty tight and pretty rusty, so we'll see if it comes out. All right, not bad. Keep in mind, this is a brand new control arm, so it's coming out easier than it normally would. If yours is stuck in there, what you can do is spray some rust penetrant on the inside of the control arm, or actually the subframe here, where the nut is, and that should hopefully free it up a little bit. This is ready to pull out. There we go. All right, there's one more bolt out. Over here we have another control arm bolt. This is the biggest of the three, so it's going to probably be the toughest to take out. Obviously we have a new control arm here, so it's going to be easy for us. For you, you may want to spray some rust penetrant up in these holes because you'll get some lubricant on the threads. So we're going to use this 21mm socket and a 1/2-inch breaker bar to get it loose. That's probably the right tool for the job because you can get a lot of leverage on the job. And it looks like this one's coming right out nice and easy. If nothing else, you can get an idea of how long this bolt is. So if you're fighting with yours, you'll know how much you have to take out. All right, there it is. All right, so now all the bolts are removed from the control arm. So I'm hoping that we can just pry a little bit on this lower ball joint and maybe even up here. And I'm hopeful that this will all just come out. All right. All right, so that came out really easily because obviously it's brand new, but the ball joint itself will often be stuck in this lower knuckle, or in this lower section of the knuckle. So you may have to whack this with a hammer to get it out, like right in this region. You might have to tap it with a hammer and spray some rust penetrant in the top to knock it loose because they do rust up inside here and it's tough to get them out. You could also use a ball joint press. It's sometimes tough to get in here though, so usually a hammer will loosen it up for you. All right, so I have this control arm now, and I'm going to put it right back in to the spot in the subframe where it belongs. It's going to require a little bit of finagling to get it into its spot. So we now have the ability to put a bolt in, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right, so that'll hold it in there for the moment. Now let's try and get the ball joint in. All right. So now you have to make sure that the ball joint is up all the way or else the bolt won't go through. You can look through the hole and you'll know whether it is in the right spot or not. We'll throw the nut on and we'll tighten that up in a few minutes. All right, so this one is a little tricky because the mount is kind of facing the wrong direction. So what you want to do is put a pry bar in here and try and get this hole lined up a bit. Then once the hole is in there, or once the bolt is in the hole, hopefully we can kind of twist this, maybe even jack up the control arm to get this to straighten out. Let's see if we can do this. Oh, that worked better than expected. Just make sure you don't cross-thread it in there. So you always want to start all these bolts by hand so you don't mess up the threads of any of them. All right, so I've started it by hand. Now I'm just gonna thread it in. All right, we're gonna snug that up. We're gonna use our 15mm socket and a torque wrench to tighten up this lower ball joint bolt to 46 foot-pounds. Up here, we got the front control arm bolt, and we're gonna tighten that to 85 foot-pounds. The rear control arm bolt needs to be torqued to 110 foot-pounds. So let's get our torque wrench on there. We'll tighten it up. Whenever you do any sort of suspension work like this, you're going to want to get an alignment afterwards because your alignment is going to be different than when you started. So now we're going to pick up the wheel and put it right back on and throw the lug nuts on. All right, there we go. You always want to start all your lug nuts by hand because you don't want to cross-thread any of them, because once you've cross-threaded lug nuts, you have a really bad day. All right, we've got our 19mm socket and our torque wrench. So we're going to torque each one of these to 100 foot-pounds. Going to do it in a star pattern, and that way the wheel is torqued nice and evenly. All right, there we are.